Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to do a full album today as we typically do on Sundays, going through the album track by track, exploring what each one does in isolation and how it works into the larger artwork of the entire album. We have an interesting one today though. 24 tracks on this album. I definitely think that's a record. I know we've had some prog albums, particularly some conceptual prog albums that have gone into the high teens, maybe. I don't think we've had anything cross the 20 track number though. But what's even more wild about this is the album's only like 30 minutes long. So, I mean, the average track length in here looks to be about 50 to 70 minutes. We're looking at a bunch of short songs. Given the album artwork and the name of the band, I'm kind of leaning towards grindcore. Although I could be surprised. We're going to be checking out Nasum. Shift is the album name. I have no idea how this is going to go. I don't even know how does this work? How do I talk about songs that aren't even a minute long? Is there going to be enough meat in here to crack the shell and get to it? I don't know. We'll see how this goes. We do have something a little different today. This is the only album by Nasum that isn't on Spotify. So I've kind of duct taped this thing together and I'm showing Bandcamp right there. And I had to blow up my the page on Bandcamp to like 300% to make it look readable. And even then it's not like great. I'm sure if you're on a phone, I don't know if you can read the title, but I still have title and progress there. Let's roll with this. We're going to start with track 1, Partcles. As you can see, it's 75 minutes. That's nothing. We may end up just doing track 2 as well, but I'm pretty sure at that point, which would put us 3 minutes into the album, a tenth of the way. Golly. We're going to take a break, discuss what we listened to, and see what kind of analysis I land on. So let's dive into this. Nasum's Partcles. Oh, so this is just going to be a straight up intro, huh? Oh, maybe not. Ooh, oh, the accent shift there. Snare player is getting funky. Okay, I got something here. There's like no pause between tracks on this. I don't know if that's a Bandcamp thing or if that's just the way that they like their album. I know there's technically like a second left, but I cut the song off. I know that. But there's just no way I was going to be able to reach a good point there where we would have had a clean stop and I actually timed that right. It definitely creates something aggressive though. I was hoping for even the industry standard 2 second gap between track 1 and 2, and we didn't get that. And seeing how close this one runs to the end of its runtime, I don't think we were going to get a break there either. The songs are aggressive and just a lot of weight and intensity and animosity pushed onto the listener, and the relentlessness of the tracks so far, the lack of break or space between them leans into that so well. I don't enjoy it. But I appreciate what they're going for here, and I mean that's if you want your album to feel oppressive, don't give the listener a single second of reprieve, and yeah, don't even don't even give them time between tracks. Just run everything into one another. Again, I don't know if that's the platform or if that's the way it's supposed to be experienced, but it works. It's definitely a conducive experience to everything else I'm feeling in the two songs so far. That it feels purposeful to me at least. Okay, what is this though? I mean, okay, yeah, this is grindcore, right? Fast playing. We've heard this before. I don't think we've done a lot of grindcore on the channel, but I'm aware of the genre, of what it does. To me, it's just really fast death metal. It kind of reminds me of like I think this is what people hear when they hear death metal. Like your average listener, this is their perception of what death metal is. It's just screaming and noise and incomprehensibility and fast playing and yeah, just noise, right? This is probably the best thing that I think I could have experienced right now because I remember listening to I don't know, man, probably some like Anthrax back when I was in middle school or something. So we're talking like 12, 13, 14 maybe. And and it's just sounding like total noise. And you know, you guys have introduced me to more extreme metals over the years, and I'm becoming to appreciate them. And I can hear the differences between the different styles and all that, the nuances in it. This is probably what I heard when I checked out Anthrax, 20 years ago or whatever. Yeah. Um, and this is actually going to make it really difficult to talk about the Engine of Death. There was a bridge in there, I suppose we can call it a halftime feel. Actually, it kind of felt like quarter time as we shifted away from 16th notes to eighth notes, but then we also felt like we dropped the tempo half on top of that, which felt like we entered quarter time. Just, it feels like the whole song just dragged way down. And I could feel the groove of what was being played. I could hear the riffs that were being played. I could hear what the drummer was doing. Sonically, this had detail to it that I couldn't hear anywhere else in either of these tracks. This is something that I would either need to listen to with a really good slowing down software. I don't even know if it exists to retain the detail of it, but just slow it down where it doesn't sound distorted or garbled or anything like that. Software is so advanced these days. I'm sure technology like that exists right now. I don't know that I know of it. Like back in the day, I used to use pulse stretch to take something and stretch it out, but that also pitch shifted, if I remember correctly. And I know that we have like auto-tune these days that does pitch shifting and temporal shifting in order to keep pitches even if you're speeding things up, or to change pitch but retain time. Like, those two are very interlinked just because of how sound waves work. Maybe there's a way to slow down an entire song like this and retain the details. Either that or I need sheet music, because I'm going to be completely honest here. When they are thrashing out, I don't hear anything. The drums, yeah, I hear the blast beats and the double bass kicks that's going on. I might even be wrong about the double bass. Was it just alternating snare and bass? I don't know. The guitars, I tell you, I don't hear a single riff. As far as I can tell, they're just running their hand up and down the neck and just strumming as fast as they can. I don't hear any specific notes, chords, melodies, riffs, patterns, nothing. It's just noise. In like the most neutral definition of that. I'm not saying that it's noisy garbage or anything like that. Like, I can't perceive detail in what's being played. I don't hear a bass at all. If there is a bass, I'm going to assume there is. Bands have bassists, but I don't hear it. But there is one element of clarity, oddly enough, in here. It blows my mind. For metal production, the vocals are exceptionally clear. The dude got a gnarly higher harsh. Maybe it's a fry. I don't know what kind of style it is, but I can make out syllables at times. I heard him say the engine of death over and over towards the end of the track. Earlier in the second track, when we hit the chorus, I think it was, maybe. I heard him say the engine of death. I don't think I've heard any other words, but I was so blown away trying to dissect the guitar work that I really wasn't paying that much attention to it. But it's very forward in the mix. Everything else becomes a wall of sounds. Not like actually kind of like post-rock, but through a different means. Or post-metal, I should say. Post-metal does wall of sound by long held out notes. This does wall of sound by just cramming. I swear, if this was sheet music, it would just be black ink in each bar. No specific notes, just a wall of black ink. Oh man, at least that's what I heard. And so from that perspective, right, I don't have analysis for this. I mean, beyond the fact that, hey, I heard a lot of notes. It sounded chaotic and oppressive, and it was noisy. And I think my experience with the album is working within that. I feel very not scared, but I don't want to get into the next track. This is definitely not my kind of music. Even in the more aggressive, extreme types of metal, I prefer to be able to hear what's going on, right? I gravitate towards the tech death that has really strong production in it, where everything is masterfully added in the mix and all the instruments work well within each other. I don't mind fast, noisy playing as long as I can hear what's going on, and I can't hear. I'm kind of hoping this is one of those cases, though, because, I mean, we have 22 tracks to go. I hope it's one of those cases where at the beginning, I'm a bit lost, and I just develop an ear for it over the course of the album. It would not be the first time that that's happened. There have been plenty of albums that we've checked out in the past that the first couple of tracks, I'm like, nope, I don't have good criticism for it. I don't have good analysis for it. I don't like it. I don't understand it. And by the end of the album, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it now, right? Even if it doesn't become something I'm actively going to put on later, at least I can come around to it. I understand what they're doing. And right here, I understand what they're doing. They're just being loud and noisy, but I can't hear past that yet. And I hope I can. I hope this isn't something that's going to take multiple engagements. Because, like black metal, it took me like a year and a half to be able to hear past, the mid-fi production that a lot of black metal bands like to use. Completely excluding more avant-garde or experimental black metal bands. But like looking at some of the core standardized sounds within black metal, it took me a long time to kind of get past that hurdle. And if I can't do that in 30 minutes here, I don't think this is going to be a very good analysis. Maybe a fine reaction. Maybe some of you are already laughing, knowing what's ahead of me in this album, knowing I'm going to have nothing really of worth to say here beyond my shocked face at the end of every track. I don't know, man. I guess let's hit some lyrics on these. I do kind of worry this is going to be a lyric heavy album. Or, sorry, a lyric heavy video. I want to be the first time, but that's usually reserved for hip hop albums, where the music tends to be a bit more simple. I just have less to say about it, and then we get into the lyrics, and they're like incredibly dense. There's a lot to talk about. I feel like that may end up here, even if the lyrics aren't incredibly dense. It's just like 3 lines. Hey, he said engine of death. He wants to, he's got a machine that kills people. Moving on. And that still takes up more space than, my ability to dissect what's going on with the music. I don't know. Let me hit some lyrics on these two, and we'll see what's going on there. I did forget that there is an instrumental, well, more like an atmospheric opening to this. I originally thought that track 1, Partcles, was just going to be this atmospheric intro track. Little did I know they wanted to cram a 20-second song at the end of this atmospheric intro. But I did think that was interesting. It did not set me up for anything going on in the album. It doesn't feel as deceptive as a metal album that starts with like a string trio and then we never hear strings again on the album, but it gave me static elements, just, a static atmosphere. I'm not saying that there's nothing moving in it, but it's not going anywhere. We're just building this feeling. And then from that singularity explodes all of this sound and noise and guitars and drums and screaming. It actually kind of works from that description. The lyrics are about energy. It's about particles. It's about how we are all just vibrating mass. Particles of things formed together, except unlike some other inanimate things that were formed by particles, we have guilt and shame. It's the only thing it focuses on, not consciousness, not intelligence, not anything like that, just guilt and shame. It says we're particles with only ourselves to blame, and that's really the only opinion in here. Everything else is just this constant focus. Energy in its purest form, I suppose that would be particles. And it says that it doesn't matter where it's from, it just gets ground into dust. 12 whole lines on this track, which I suppose is a lot for the 20 seconds the vocals were around. But it's not a very deep song. It says what it needs to say and gets out of the way, and I can appreciate that. That's what I love about EPs and short films and miniseries. A TV show with like 1 season to it, 8 episodes. And it has a clear focus, it does what it needs to do, and then it leaves. No fluff, no filler, no padding, no extra stuff after just because it was big and took off and they wanted to milk it. Just, they got in, they did it, they left. Nothing else to it. It does feel a bit lacking for me, but I can't say it's vague. It says exactly what it wants to say. I guess we're going to see what the Engine of Death is saying then. I'm pretty sure that's going to be fairly straightforward too. This song has a bit more bite to it. To say I was surprised, I think would be an understatement. It says the engine is alive, fear it cultivates, masses putrefy, profit they create. The engine's working well, iron glowing red, masses put in hell, piles of newly dead. The chorus then says, a sickening steam is emerging from the pipes, this brutal machinery is bound to take some lives, it's the engine of death. This is Control. It talks about putting fear into people. Later on in verse 2, it says the engine evolves and loads another game. It's running wild and impossible to stop, and the masses can't stop it, so they'll stay as crops. The bridge really starts to point this out. If the metaphor has gone over your head, it's going to say it very bluntly here. It's running on human fuel, spewing black ash and toxic dust, man against machine, a mighty duel. So this machine runs on humans. It cultivates fear. It crushes the human spirit. There is revolt, but it doesn't work. This is Control, but I also think it could be the capitalist machine based on one single line in verse 1 that says it putrefies masses and profits it creates. But I really like this next line. I kind of glossed over it when I was reading it, but it's talking about how it puts fear into people and it creates profit, and that masses are put into hell, that people are put into hellish lives, and that there's piles of newly dead, that this is all the workings of the machine. And this one line, it says the engine's working well. This is exactly what it was built to do. Break people's back and create money. I mean, you could probably take that in a couple different ways. There's quite a few metaphorical machines that exist out there that would fall in line with this. You can even look at particularly the war machine, probably focusing on U.S. wars as of recent, as this too. Physical labor for humans to create profits for others. But yeah, I think it's pretty clear what they're saying here. How you want to take that metaphor, what you want to apply it to, that's going to be whatever you bring to the table. But I think it's pretty clear this is a political track. And like I mentioned with the bridge, I think it's really interesting that they use this metaphor for the entire song. And they're like, if you haven't got it yet, this thing runs on human fuel. Humans go into it and are ground up to ensure it's working at optimal levels. So if you ain't figured it out by now what we're talking about, you might as well leave the album. You barely have any critical thought going on here. Kind of cracks me up because it fits with the music, right? This music is raw, it's in your face, it's aggressive. You can't really misconstrue what the music is doing. And so while lyrically we have this layer of metaphor, eventually they're like, screw it, get rid of the metaphor. We're going to say this as bluntly as we can, and that fits with the music. But what I think is interesting is that at that moment, that's the bridge. That's when the song hits its halftime feel and kind of lightens up a little bit. You can hear what's going on. And I think that clarity in the music tied with the, stripping away of the metaphoric layer and kind of saying things a bit more bluntly. I mean, it's still metaphor there, right? It's not a literal machine that humans are literally being put into, but it kind of strips back some of the more fantastic elements and focuses on this very specific fact. It's kind of alluded to it, but now it's deliberately saying it. And yeah, the music kind of strips back a little bit here too. I think that's kind of nice. Also, this song sounds like a human consuming machine. I'm sure that that's just the sound of the album, but it does line up really well on this track. All right. Let's push forward. The next song is one of the longest on the album. Oh, no, not yet. That's track 5. That one's a little over 2 minutes. That's a doozy. That's a long one right there. We'll probably listen to this one in isolation, called Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and then we'll do 4 and 5 together. All right, let's see what's going on. Awakening, with the pitch shifts, those really large ones. I don't know what the rhythm is. It could be tremolo picking for all I know. Interesting production on the vocals. They're split, right? There's not a center channel. I got the timing on that. All right, so a couple of neat revelations here. I heard the guitar work. I'm kind of leaning towards the fact that it's just constant 16th notes. It does sound like the notes are equal in length, so it's probably not tremolo picking. Both guitars seem to be strumming at the same speed too. I'm leaning towards 16th notes, though it does sound a bit rough. It's kind of tough to hear the timing on all of this given everything that's happening at the same time. But I'd say generally the song doesn't fall apart, and so the lack of perfection in the playing, I mean, as usual with metal, it's just not a huge concern. It sounds fine. I know a lot of people prefer less perfection in their metal, but I heard some guitar work. Pure 16th notes, do 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 do, just kind of jumping around between these four notes, but playing each of them four times, something along those lines. I heard that riff, but the thing was, I heard that riff in isolation. Once the vocals came on, that's when things get muddy. I'm about to eat some words here, okay? So, if y'all been waiting for an I told you so, this might be your moment. In the past, something I have talked about with metal vocal production in particular is a lot of metal bands like to push the growls into the mix. And it's just never really been a part of the genre that I've enjoyed. I've tended to gravitate towards the metal style, or I guess the metal bands, who elevate the vocals a little bit and kind of put them in a different place than the music. Not necessarily pushing it so far above the mix like pop does, where the vocals are just so much louder than everything else, but definitely giving it a little bit more oomph. Think radio rock, where the vocals are quite prominent, but not as prominent as pop music. I've mentioned that in the past, especially when it comes to growling, it's really difficult to hear, well, especially when they're growling and they're playing like down-tuned guitars and they're kind of mixing in the range. But I can't hear the enunciation of the growls. I can't hear words. It's more of just a random rumbling that's happening in the core of the song. Everything else is drowning it out. This is sort of the opposite of that. The vocals are very present. I mentioned that during the last analysis segment, but I I think they're too present. Not that they're way above the mix like pop vocals would be, but just enough above it. But whenever the vocals are present, I can no longer make out what the guitars are doing. There's too much overlap there. I wish the vocals were stuffed into the mix a little bit more. I think this is a guess. Yeah, as usual, I'm a composer. I'm not a producer. I'm getting better at mixing music, but I still don't always know what should happen. I don't have that gut instinct like a good producer does. Or I guess, the years of knowledge that a good producer would have. Maybe putting the vocals into the mix here wouldn't be the right thing to do. Maybe it would just make things worse, but it's It's my first thought. Maybe if the vocals are brought down a little bit. There's also the elements of the vocals and guitars kind of being similar in pitch too. I think if the vocals were growled at this prominence in the mix, it would have been okay. The guitars tend to be playing a little bit higher up in range. We don't have the super low down-tuned stuff we hear in a lot of modern metal. This feels closer to like 90s thrash and death metal, where they were happier playing a little bit higher up. I mean, it's just a very different sound because there's a different octave that the guitarists like to play in than the modern metal sound, which is all like, hey, what's the lowest note we can hit? Let's downtune our instruments and add extra lower strings to it. Let's put some bass strings on the guitar. And so there is a bit of overlap, I think, there that there's just not enough space carved out in the mix for both of these instruments to play at the same time. And that could be entirely by design too. It adds to that wall of sound. You know, if they were a bit more separated, it would feel less claustrophobic. It would feel less noisy. Would I be able to hear more? Yes. Does that mean it would be better art? Not necessarily. You know, this is a case where I want more clarity, not because it's the artistic choice, but because I'm trying to understand what's going on here. As a fellow artist, I want to understand this better. And that doesn't always, being able to understand it better doesn't always make it better art. And I don't think that's something I've expressed enough in the past. Whenever I talk about wanting more clarity, it typically comes from this position of being a critic. It's hard to criticize or even talk about or analyze or do anything to art if you can't understand it. But sometimes that lack of understanding is the point. Regardless, it was cool to hear the guitars. It was still tough. Like, I really had to key into it. But as soon as the vocals came back, there was just no hope. Even knowing what the riff was, I had such a hard time hearing them play it. And I think most of that was even my brain just injecting stuff in there that I wasn't hearing, but I knew was going on. So yeah, there's that. Drums. Drums. This song, I listened to them a little bit more, and I'm quite impressed by it. It's not perfect. Like the guitars, there's a little bit of sloppiness at times. It's part of their charm, if you will. I prefer a little bit more precision in the playing, but I'll let it pass. I mean, this is supposed to be rough. It's very aggressive, and I think a cleanliness could also take away from that. Again, artistic integrity versus I don't know what you would call what I want. I don't have a just perfection, right? I guess. But the drummer's doing some crazy stuff in here. The fills are very cool. There's some neat cymbal work in here. I totally forgot to talk about those offbeat accents in track 1 that really changed up the rhythmic pulse at the end of that track. That was interesting. The drummer is not like constantly doing wild things like some prog drummer would, but they're not just sitting within that pocket. They're like, okay, I'm doing alternating bass and snare right now, and just locking into that for a minute straight. No, there's some neat ideas in here. It's given me a reason to listen to the drummer more often than just hearing, because usually when it comes to drums, I'll lock into them for a second, I'll feel out the groove. If they're doing anything interesting, I'll get into that. And then I'll move on to something else, keeping a little bit of an ear out for drum fills or little switch ups, but not really coming back to them until maybe we go to a different time feel or a different section. Maybe I hear a different pattern happen. But here, I'm listening to the guitars. I'm like, I don't know what's going on here. Should I keep... No, let me check out the drummer. Let me see what they're doing. I really give them some focus, even if they're just playing the same pattern over and over, because I know they're gonna bust something interesting out. And I dig that. I'm a huge fan of technical drumming. And while this drummer sits in the pocket a lot, which is necessary for the type of oppressive feeling they're going for here, they don't allow that to force them to be pigeonholed into that style of playing. And there's some really cool things going on there. All right? I urge you to listen to the drums more, not necessarily on this next track since it's 30 seconds, but track 5, like I said, it's one of the longest ones. right? It's a little over 2 minutes. This is an epic going on here. I'm sure there's going to be some interesting drum work in there simply because of the length of it. So I thought that was pretty cool. Something I kind of picked up on the periphery from tracks 1 and 2, but didn't really lock into until I heard the drummer do some cool stuff here. Vocals, man. There are two types of harshes used here. One a little bit of a lower fry and the other one a higher fry. At least I think they're fries. Y'all can correct me, but they don't sound like false chords to me. But I'm still like, I'm like 70% on that, right? I'm usually pretty accurate, but I've been wrong in the past. And as someone who's not very good at harsh vocals myself, I can't always hear the differences between the two. So we do have the two types of vocals, which is cool. I don't think we had any of the lower ones on this track, but we did on Engine of Death. I remember a little bit of bouncing back and forth. I don't know why I didn't bring that up last time. But the production on it is what I really want to focus on here, because we had a few sections that I remember. Maybe I misremember this. The vocals are center channel, right? Sometimes on this album. When I noticed this about halfway through track 3, though, they're split out, not really far off. Sorry, excuse me, I have a weird hiccup. I've never hiccuped on this channel. Oh, man. What is this band doing? Nasum, man. Anyways, the vocals are just slightly pushed out to the side. I don't know if it's the same track or if it's a second recording. They're very close to each other, though. But it just leaves this emptiness in the middle. And with the guitars also pushed out to the sides, I wonder if this is also another thing that's kind of making it feel cluttered. If the vocals were just center and the guitars were just side, maybe I could hear them a little clearer when the vocals came in. Again, production's not my strong suit, but I do hear these patterns and they seem like things that would affect it. So I thought that was really interesting. I wonder what the choice is, the reason behind that vocal separation there, rather than just leaving it singular. All right, I think that wraps this one up. Let me dive into some lyrics, and then we'll hit tracks. And then we will hit tracks 4 and 5. Some of y'all might have caught this. It's not "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star." It's "Twinkle Twinkle Little Scar." Oh, wait, no, maybe you didn't catch this. Bandcamp does have "Star," but Genius has "Scar." And now I'm curious which one's right. Anyways, the song does use the word scars multiple times, which makes me kind of lean maybe towards that one. This is about domestic abuse, and much like the Machine of Death, or what was that song called? The Engine of Death. It alludes to, well, it speaks about this, not metaphorically here, but less clear. And then in the bridge, it just comes straight forth. It says, "This is sheer domestic violence." Like, I really like this band. They're very no frills, right? They're not using flowery, beautiful language. They are using metaphor at times, but nothing that's too dense that could easily go over someone's head. I think they're pretty clear in everything they've said. But regardless, there's still a point in every song so far where they're like, this is what the song's about, in case you missed it. And I kind of enjoy that bluntness because it just works so well with the bluntness of the music. I'm going to try not to say that after every single lyrical dive, but it is something that I find very endearing about this whole experience so far. So if you don't want to hear a song about domestic violence, skip ahead. If you are watching this in like the week or so that it's been released, I know there's no chapters yet. I'm still waiting for this YouTube strike to go away so that we can get chapter markers back. However, the timestamps are in the description. You can just click on those. That'll take you to the next reaction or wherever you want to go. If you're from the future though, and we have chapters back, well, that's nice. I'm glad to hear. So let's see. Count the scars in her eyes, bleeding tears by his lies. They say that sticks and stones may break her bones, but words hurt the most. This is the chorus. The second time we see the chorus, though, it says, "They say that sticks and stones may break her bones." Well, actually they did. What's interesting here, though, is that it's not just the physical abuse going on here. Talking about, this person has scars on them, that, they're crying, that her bones have been broken from the abuse. But the second half of the chorus says that her blood is used in his art. She's used, she's drained, living the life that he chose. It doesn't say what his art is, but whatever's going on here, this person is not just abusing this person physically, but using them emotionally. Verse 1 says that she knows she can't escape and she waits for the daily pain. Verse 2 says that his drunken fist lands on her face and she must endure his boiling hate. And then we get to the bridge and says, "Someday she'll avenge, he'll suffer her revenge, the sheer domestic violence." And that's the whole song right there. Very straightforward. Difficult to misconstrue what's going on. And like I said, in the bridge, they just cut to the point. Make sure that you understand what's happening here. All right. So a song about a machine that devours humanity, and a song about domestic abuse. Pretty violent domestic abuse too. All domestic abuse is pretty much the same as far as I see it, but there's definitely levels, maybe not in the eyes of the law, but you can escalate domestic abuse. And this seems to be some of the most violent. I mean, she has broken bones, scars. So it's, that's two heavy songs back to back. The first song wasn't too positive, but it wasn't heavy either. It's just like, hey, we're all made out of energy. Isn't that cool? We're shameful and it kind of sucks, but hey, energy, right? They're kind of balancing that positive vibe with a dour look. After that, they're like, nope, pedal to the metal. We're going dark. This next track is called "No Paradise for the Damned." It's 30 seconds long. Then we're going to check out "Wrath." Let's see what's going on. Oh, I know we ain't gonna stick with this long, but okay. Got like a slightly new metal feel. I can kind of get behind this. I can hear the guitar riffs. Yeah, okay. Okay. Got those dotted quarters in there. Hitting the bell of the ride cymbal. The snare drum working with the guitar. Dude. Dude, this is one of those albums, man. I may not like everything on it, but that was solid. And the thing is, too, right? If I was listening to this on my own, if somehow, for whatever reason, this ended up on my listen list for the year, I would have made it through the first few tracks and been like, well, I understand what this band's doing, and probably would have wrote it off. Then track 5, man, I would have missed it. I dug that. I mean, first, I can hear the guitars. I can make out what they're playing. I can hear the riff. The drummer isn't going super crazy either. There's some cool nuances to it. It's the snare accents in particular. You can listen how the drummer loves to line up their snare accents with guitar accents, even if they're not necessarily exactly on a downbeat. We even heard that at the end with that and the snare going ba 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 ba. Just like, yes, give me this type of synergy that isn't just like everyone's working together to create something oppressive and singular. It sounds great. There's so much groove going on here. Just the syncopation alone, whether it was one instrument or, everyone working together, which more often than not, it was a cooperative effort here. But just having syncopation in here, strong elements of groove from beat 1. Yeah, dude, this is something that's been missing from this album. And, again, maybe for better because of intention, right? If this is supposed to be an oppressive album, you don't want somebody to enjoy listening to it. I have not really enjoyed the first 5 minutes of this album. I enjoyed these 2 minutes, though. It's groovy, rule of cool stuff. I love the guitar riff. The drum work's neat. The only thing I think I kind of missed was the multiple vocals, which we did get a little bit of on track 4, with the lower vocals coming in even further away than the higher vocals and kind of having this bouncing back and forth going on there. I would have liked a little bit more of that contrast on this track too, as far as vocals are concerned. But I'm going to take what I can get, right? I am in deep waters here, and I do not understand how to swim. Wow, this metaphor is not great. Anyways, this is not my cup of tea. We'll go in that direction. I'm so far outside of my comfort zone, and yet I found a track that I can groove with, Everything in here so far has been kind of like, oh, that's aggressive. That's wild. That's so big and powerful, and noisy, right? So any stank face was more of like, yeah, that's not my cup of tea. But like the stank face here was like, yeah, give me more of that. And it all comes down to that groove. Also, how the vocal rhythmic ideas syncopate around what the guitars and drums are doing collectively. So there is a little bit of, not necessarily like polyrhythmic ideas going on there, but like if we could create counter rhythm, right? The idea of counterpoint is 2 different melodies happening at the same time and complementing each other. This is 2 different rhythmic patterns complementing each other. They're still in the same time time signature. They're both in the same phrasing. We're still working within 4/4 here, right? There's nothing that really differentiates them. They're just accenting different beats, and it creates this cool bouncing back and forth idea like we get with counterpoint regarding melody. So yeah, counter rhythm. I don't think that's a thing. I want to make it today. Cool stuff though. Like I love how everything's kind of working together here, uh, doing their own thing, but interlocking with each other and creating these cool layers. We just haven't really seen too much of that here. Also, for whatever reason, I feel like the guitars can be heard here. I don't think my ears have just magically adapted over the past 10 minutes. But I don't think the mix has changed either. But when the guitars and vocals are both going, I could make out what the guitars were doing. And maybe that's just because of the slower riffs going on. It's not just constant 16th notes. Maybe that helps a lot by reducing the amount of noise coming from those instruments. And by noise, I just mean like the amount of sonic information coming from the guitars is greatly reduced, so I can focus on what's important because they're only playing what's important. And maybe that's just helping me, sift through it better. I don't know. But yeah, I still can't hear a bass. Maybe that's just I'm gonna hyper focus on lower frequencies in this next couple of minutes. See if that helps at all. But yeah, like I think that's all I got to say on this one, man. It's rather straightforward. It was over before I knew it, which I mean, it's 2 minutes long, right? I think there's a whole two riffs in here, but both of them were fantastic. I love the rhythm, the syncopation, the way everything works together here. The drummer was cool. It's still oppressive in that metallic way of just having angsty tones, and like the drums are loud, the vocals are still harsh, like there's still animosity here, but it's groovier. It's not trying to compress my soul in. I dig that. For a song called Wrath, this is the lightest on the album so far, which is like a weird thing to say. Oh man. What do we have going on in lyrics here? No Paradise for the Damned is, I mean, it's what the title says. You get what's on the front of the tin with this one. It talks about the end of the human race and just being a terrible place to be. Realizing that the only place left to go is hell. It says the world we knew has come to an end. Bombs cloud the sky as the destruction begins. Death, we can hear the screams from the dying race. The flames feed the Holocaust as radiation burns. The wind of devastation turns the earth into ash. Hell is awaiting us as we realize that earth is no paradise for the damned. Sticking with this concept of being blunt and straightforward, we've kind of gotten rid of any sort of metaphorical pretext. We're just working with very straightforward lyrics on both that song and Wrath. Wrath is about using the pain of oppression to stand up against your oppressors. Verse 1 says, I've been under submission for so long, my soul is starting to rot. I've shed my share of blood, sweat, and tears, now I'm leaving this melting pot. I'm tired of being your rat, armored with reasons, threats, and lies. I'm about to unleash my wrath. Verse 2 says, I've tasted your fist and felt your whip. I've dealt with the pain. The more that you hit me, the more that you feed the anger boiling within. I've been your workhorse. Now it's time for this horse to kick your head. So I'm pounding my way out. Step aside or you'll be dead. The chorus says, I won't accept this life, a victim of your oppression, to be enslaved and sell my soul to the other side. I won't be your puppet on a string. Again, very straightforward with its message, not trying to sugarcoat that one at all. Just having to do all of this work without a choice, being broken down physically with all of the pain of the whips and being beaten, but also emotionally. It talks about that he falls into a dark depression, just being a slave cast away in chains, buried under bricks of guilt. Said he's done with all that. Time to move on. All right. That's going to bring us to our next group here. Fear is your weapon, probably moving into the deepest hole, and then high on hate. Talking about 3 minutes in total. Let's dive in.
How do we retrain people so that they understand that it's not about how much money they have to campaign with? It's about what they do once they take the office.
Oh, the two guitars are doing separate things right here. That's new. Interesting bit of positive atmosphere here. Okay. That was definitely two different recorded lines. All right. I'll be honest. Those three songs haven't really changed my opinion on this album, hasn't really changed my understanding of it. I don't really have a lot to add here. But there are a couple of things that I want to touch on. That song, the vocals ended up feeling a bit more rapped. They were delivered much faster as far as syllables per second than some of the other songs. And this is where I began to notice that the two vocal tracks, since we still have a lot of this splitting where we have one just slightly left and one slightly right, that they're different. I can hear that because they're hitting different syllables at different times. This, I think, is the first time that a muddiness of an imperfection of performance has hindered my appreciation of it. As I mentioned throughout the rest of this album, it's fine, right? There's so much noise going on that if you play a note late or early, whatever, a lot of it's really difficult to hear. Anyways, the purpose is to create this overwhelming feeling, not to show off technical skill. But at this point, with the vocals so far forward in the mix and so present, having been so clear this entire time, it becomes muddy. And instead of having an overwhelming sense of, wall of sound going on here, it just sounds garbled. I don't think it works. I think if you're going to be singing this quickly, you need that precision. The guitars can get away with it. They have a lot of compression going on. The vocals are louder than them, anyways. The drums can help create the auditory illusion of syncopation if they're accenting a beat where the guitars get a little out of sync. The drummer can give that core sound like on the beat. That when you're listening to it, you just interpret it all happening at once. That's just, it doesn't happen with the vocals. They're in a totally different realm of the mix, and they're kind of isolated out there. If they mess up, you hear it. And yeah, this song just kind of showcases that for me. I wager, though, that for your average grindcore enjoyer, it's either a positive or you didn't pick it up. I don't think it was so bad, so uh, such an issue that it would pull people out of it. I'm listening hyper focused, critical attention. I'm really paying attention to as much detail as possible. I'm going to pick up on little things like that. It's going to stand out to me, but maybe it doesn't for you. Um, but yeah, to me, it's one of those places where it would have been better to do another take to try to get that better perfection, even fix it in post if you have to. I mean, this was 2004. I think you could still edit things in post then. I mean, we were still working with digital workstations. Maybe the band has a pride in doing things naturally, though, but still, take 2, 3, 4 more takes on it just to make sure that it gets lined up because it creates a muddiness that imperfection elsewhere doesn't. Now, we did have a cool thing going on here. I think this was track 7. The beginning of the song gave us 2 distinct guitar lines. We haven't really heard that much. Harmonic separation? Sure. Where they're playing the same rhythm and the same movement, but just starting on different notes. We haven't had anything where the 2 guitarists are doing their own totally different things. That was pretty cool. And for whatever reason, I think it kind of works too. Maybe it's because we didn't have too much of the vocals there. When the vocals came in, the guitars lined back up, but it worked really well. And it wasn't muddy, given how loud everything is, how compressed and big every guitar sound is. You'd think that there just wouldn't be room for multiple ideas, but yeah, I mean, it was. There's clarity to it, enough space for both of them. Part of this, I think, is just that they're separated. That helps a lot. But yeah, I mean, that was cool. I'd love to hear more of that. Other than that, though, I'm sitting on the idea that this album is something that you listen to because you enjoy it. Right? You enjoy this overwhelming sound. I don't really think this is a great album for an analytical dive, for critical listening. Maybe if you want to reproduce something like this, but I'm sitting here. We are on track 8 of 24. We're a third of the way done here. I've had a couple of new things to bring up, but honestly, unless they drastically change some ideas, how they approach songwriting, I feel like I've exhausted everything there is to talk about. It'll be interesting to see if they change my mind on that. But many of the songs are feeling very similar to me. And a lot of that's probably because I have a tough time hearing past that wall of sound. Maybe if I could get past that hurdle, I would hear nuance between them all. But as it stands, this album is like 70% wall of sound and then 30% neat ideas, whether it was that groovy thing in was at the end of Engine of Death. We had the entirety of Wrath that still stands out as a unique section of this song. And then that split guitar idea at the beginning of Deepest Hole. Oh, and that groovy line, I suppose, at the end of Deepest Hole too. That had 2 good ideas in it, but everything between them, like they bookended just wall of noise stuff that I don't get. I can't hear the details of. And when 70% of the album all sounds the same to me, what do I have to talk about? So, I don't know. We'll see how this album goes. Let's dive into some lyrics for these 3, though. All right. The deepest hole. No, sorry. First is fear is your weapon. This just talks about people in power who use fear to control. It says your voice of hate spreads its wings, moving quickly through the air. Fueled by greed, it sows its seed in weakness and despair. Verse 2 says, fear is your weapon, it's the key. Without it, your rule is dead. It's the hate that glues to seal it all together, and your defense is now complete. To strike first and strike hard, it's your recipe. It's about people who use hate to control people. That's it. Using their voice to sow dissent between common people. All right. The deepest hole is about depression and self-hate, maybe? The chorus says, I'm keeping my cool, but there's a war inside my head. All living things around me seem to be dead. Looking forward to a day that's coming sooner than you know, when my ego takes over and lets all my blood flow. So there's a lot of inner turmoil, emotionally and mentally. Verse 1 just says that inside of me is the deepest hole you'll ever see. And verse 2 says that if you follow down that hole, you'll see the self-destruction within me. And at the very bottom of this very long hole, you will see me crawling. So that's it. They just feel alone within their own body. And high on hate continues on from fear is your weapon. It talks about people who enact violence out of hatred, calls them a pack of wolves looking for blood, but actually just looking for easy prey. That they enjoy the violence, but don't want any chance of being hurt through it. So you fight and slay the innocent. It's the agenda of today. It says you get high on hate and violence. You never look back. You just fall into your ignorance and devote yourself to terror. Very straightforward about people who just enjoy hurting others and using their ignorance and hatred to allow that, to justify it. It's sad state. All right, let's move on. So far, I've come to the conclusion this album is just about hatred, a lot of it. Hatred of the other, people using hatred to control, using hatred for greed, for personal gain, hatred of the self. It's called Shift. Maybe it's designed to be an album that looks at the shift into this mindset of how it's more prevalent in 2004, 2003 when this was recorded. I was hoping it might be a shift away from this. It sets the precedent, and then through the album we will shift away. But the end of the album is called Creature. Track 23 is Creature, and 24 is Darkness Falls. I'm not picturing anything brighter coming out of this. All right. This reaction is already twice as long as the album is. Oh, jeez. All right. We'll dive into a few more here. We have a run of several longer tracks, all of them more than a minute long. We don't have any of the shorter interludes here. So let's see what's going on. the halftime to wrap it up. We had center vocals and side vocals alternating. Okay. Oh, layered vocals. We haven't really heard too much of that. Interesting cymbal work here. All right. I've begun to think about the way that these songs are structured. Some of them do verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. Some of them leave out that final chorus entirely, having just verse, chorus, bridge. Others leave out the final bridge and chorus, just having a verse and a chorus. Some of the shorter ones just have two stanzas. I find this interesting, primarily because these songs feel complete, and it's kind of challenged something of maybe not necessarily a bias I have about what is music, but even within my own work, if I come up with one neat idea, a section or a riff or a rhythm or something, and I can't tie it into another thing, I just kind of leave it in a folder, coming back to it every once in a while, seeing if I can't transform it. Maybe I have the chops now, maybe I'm in the right mindset for it, maybe I just get it on a gut level that I didn't when I originally came up with it. In fact, there is one video on my my music channel called I think it's called Timed Up Drums, and it's just a pretty cool prog metal riff written in like 7/8 or something like that. After like 5 or 6 years of not knowing where to take it, I was like, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to throw it up here. People can listen to it if they like it, whatever. But it's still just a concept. It's not a full song. It's like, hey, I came up with this thing. I don't know what to do with it, but maybe you might want to hear it. And that's even that itself is totally different from what Nasum and a lot of grindcore bands do. I'm listening to these songs, listening to the structure, hearing honestly only one or two ideas in here. Some of these songs are based on a single riff. They sing the riff, they play the riff, they sing 8 lines of lyrics, and then they call it a day. And the song feels complete at the end. It doesn't feel like it's lacking. It doesn't feel like it was something that could have been expanded. Would I like some of these songs to have more to them? Sure. I'm a fan of expanded ideas. I like classical music. I like prog rock and metal. I like songs that fully explore what they're trying to do. But what does fully explore mean? Could these songs be taken into larger directions? Sure. But do they feel like they need to be? Not all of them. And that's a subjective thing too. But it puts a different perspective on the relationship between structural complexity, time, uh, and completion. I think that I just don't have a lot of experience with. Like, it's one of those things. I know a song does not have to be a set length of time. It doesn't have to have a set number of ideas in it or a number of bars or anything like that. The lyrics don't need to be fully explored, poetic. It could just be one word. Like, I understand you can make short music. I just don't listen to any. And so when I think of what music is, when I think of my favorite artists and composers and what they make and how I would like my music to be influenced by them in any way or to be spoken about in the same sentence as some of them or something like that, that transforms a lot of the way I look at music composition regarding length and ideas and structure. And then I listen to this group and I'm like, this stuff works. And again, that's not something just with Nasum. Although, actually, looking at some of these comments here on Bandcamp, this seems to be one of the best grindcore bands ever, or at least they have a lot of fans who think so. um, so maybe I'm starting off with some really peak grindcore. Maybe y'all can give me some stuff that just doesn't work. A band that's just a bit amateurish about it, and the songs do feel incomplete and feel like they could be more, whatever. But, I'm listening to this and I'm like, I don't like this, but I need more of this in my life just to have this, other side, to have this other opinion about music in a sense. I don't know that I'm going to purposefully go out of my way to make 1 minute long songs now, but it has opened my eyes a little bit. It makes me want to revisit some of the projects I've worked on. And instead of trying to figure out where to take them, maybe I can just find an ending for them. Maybe the song only ends up being 1:45, but now it's not just a work in progress anymore. It's a finished idea ready for production. Because most of the stuff I have is in sheet music. It would need to still be produced, recorded and stuff. But at least the song itself, as far as what's on paper, would be done. I'm not going to sit here and delude myself into thinking I can turn 30 works in progress into complete tracks now, but what if I got 3 of them and just said, you know what, this is good enough? The only thing I think I have to talk about this specific group of songs here is track 10's Circle of Defeat. How long was that? Minute 10? I guess about 30 seconds in then. In the middle of the song. Geez, that feels so weird to say. But they had this atmospheric moment. We kind of cut to halftime for a little bit, and something happened on the outskirts. I don't know what it was. It could have just been more guitar layers. It felt very rich, though. like a choir maybe, or a strings section or something. I honestly don't know. It left as fast as it came in. I liked it though. It felt expanded. It felt more than what we had been listening to. I'll be completely honest. Here we are finishing up track 11. We're just about halfway done with this. I'm becoming fatigued. I've mentioned it's not my cup of tea. It's not something I would necessarily put on. And the lack of variety, I think, on the whole, that's not to say that there's no variety in the album at all. Of course, there is. I talked about this 70-30 split just last analysis segment. But a lot of this album just feels very samey to me. And again, subjective, could be me just not having the ears for it yet. I'm kind of ready for the album to either surprise me or be over. And Circle of Defeat surprised me. I would love to hear more of that. It changed things up a little bit. It created a richer atmosphere. It presented new timbres. I'd like that. I'd like more of that. I don't think the album's going to give it to me. I'm not going to expect it. I'm not going to criticize it for not doing that. But it did give me a taste of what this could sound like with a little more. And as not necessarily anemic as the album is, but as stripped down as it is, working a lot of the times within singular ideas, rhythms that the drums and guitars are all in on, the guitars are all playing the same riff on. There's a singularity to a lot of this album. Deviating from that in any way is going to create contrast, and you knew I was going to bring up the C word. I mean, I love contrast, and this album has it, just not in spades. It's not quite as aggressive with its contrast as I would like, and that was a moment that I was like, ooh, kind of perked my ears up a little bit. What are you doing with this? They weren't doing anything with it, unfortunately, but it was a moment that I'm going to remember about this album. A little deviation from the norm. All right, let's look at some lyrics for these three. All right. Pathetic is the most nihilistic track, I think, so far. It's about people, a person, a group of people who feel nothing in their life. The only directive they feel within themselves is just to continue to gather. I assume it's talking about greed here of some sort. The deadly sins seem to be, especially greed, on full display with this album. The chorus says, gather all we can out of proportions to our needs, to hide within our deepest nests, and to never ever give. So the idea is just to keep consuming, keep taking, and never giving away. The verses talk about just meaningless life, dead faces, no emotion. But the outro says that we're robbing, rotting, hurting, and feeling, but at last we feel. So the pain and suffering that we have in our existence at least gives us a meaning to the existence. It's a take. That's for sure. Track 10, Circle of Defeat, kind of continues on this. The idea of continuing to take things that we don't need. It says that we gather with no control. It's a circle of defeat. It talks about overpopulation that humans have, and that because we continue to populate without an understanding of how much resources that takes to continue to keep all of us alive, that we're eventually going to lose out. And that we will reach a point where we can't feed everyone, where we can't house everyone. Track 11, Cattle. This is the first one that I'm a bit lost on. It talks about a colony of maggots. I thought we were going to be on the same idea of how humanity is scum, continuing to overpopulate and overconsume, but it doesn't really go in that direction. It says this place isn't worth its name, that we're just useless, disgusting creatures. It says, but we're governed like cattle. We treat people like dirt. but one day it gets back at you and the tables will be turned. So we have an oppressor situation again, like we saw earlier, but I'm not quite sure who this is pointed at. We have certainly seen the ruling class, we have seen capitalism being spoken about in this album, but this one doesn't seem to point a finger at anything other than just the general idea of being oppressed. He says, put yourself in his shoes. He's the one who's hurting you. He's here to get help from you, but he wants to see you burn. The bridge then says you can't kill him. He won't die. This is his choice, his last goodbye. And again, I don't see how all of this works together. It seems to just be a vague idea of oppression. Which is strange because I've talked about how this album so far has been a straight shooter. It says exactly what it wants to say, and even when it's not directly talking about something, there's enough in it that's alluding towards a specific concept that you can say, oh, okay, yeah, that's what he's mad about. But not on this track. It's a little different in that respect, I suppose. All right, we're going to move on to the next group. See what's going on with Ross, the smallest man, and probably Cornered. We'll do a set of 3 here too. Okay, that's a cool little lick there. I like the cymbal work on this. An extended instrumental bit is unique as well. A little break. Not silence, but not the aggression of the guitars and drums either. Okay, bringing back the groove of Wrath. Nice little starting out 7 and pushing out to the side. Drums are getting a little funky. All right. I want to talk a little bit about the skill required to do this. There's two skills I think that are on display here. One I already talked about a little bit. The and see, this might not seem like a skill to some people, but the ability to look at a 30-second song and say, well, that's finished. That's a track. To me, that's a skill. I don't have that skill. I would hear that and I'd be like, there's more that I need to do it. But I've already talked about this, But the other part of the skill, I think, is, it's pretty obvious in the technical performative side of this. 30-second song, yeah, I think I could play something like this. I might need to get my chops up to speed. They do play it rather quickly, but I could probably, once I got the song up to speed, a couple of hours of practice. For a 30-second song, we're talking about one riff. I don't think it's going to take that long to get to a point where I would be comfortable playing that live. But the thing is that these songs aren't played in isolation, I'm going to assume. I've never seen a live set of them, but I'm assuming that they get on stage and they play 30 minutes of music, all of it at this level of speed and intensity. And so it's the same type of appreciation I have for the performative side of a lot of faster metals, whether that's black metal or thrash or even death metal in some cases. Anything that really focuses on a lot of 16th notes and really getting through with the precision for that. Again, it's a little sloppy at times here, but for the most part, it's good enough to keep the song going. We're not talking about amateurs playing here. Imperfect, yes, they're not robots, but they're not, they didn't just pick up guitars yesterday either. There's a lot of clarity in here. So keeping that precision of time, but also keeping the speed up all of the time too, and playing a full 30-minute set while playing at this speed. And that doesn't just go for the guitars and being able to pick that fast. I don't think there's a lot of left hand technicality on this album that I've heard from the guitars. Maybe there is, and it sounds simpler. But definitely, I mean, the strumming here is going to be a massive strain. The endurance required to play this, but also looking at what the drums are doing, and again, the endurance of that. It's it's mind-boggling to think that people push their bodies to this limit, and I do want to put a little bit of appreciation on that. The other thing that I've noticed on these tracks is a rather consistent coolness to endings. Now, granted, the endings are no fluff, no filler. A lot of the endings are just let's play the riff until it's over and then play that last note like two more times, really sharp, like dut, 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 and to just like put this punctuation at the end of a song. There's not a lot of frills going on with these endings. We're not looking at these masterful 16 chord progressions to wrap up the emotional resonance of the song or anything like that. But they still like to move into these new directions. I feel like when it comes to a majority of the longer songs, anything over 60 seconds, 70 seconds, the endings tend to introduce new ideas. Even after we've done a bridge and have come back to a final verse or a final chorus, we still have something that comes after that, an outro of sorts, that typically introduces either a really sick riff, and maybe it's just because I'm hearing this riff without vocals. Maybe this is actually a riff from previous in the song, but for me, I get to hear these things without any extra noise around them, and that provides a lot of clarity, as I mentioned earlier in this video. But between that, what seems to me like completely new riffs, because we're entering a halftime feel or something like that, or introducing something that's quite a bit groovier rather than just oppressive. Drums entering halftime feels too. There's a lot of variability, I think, in the endings. A lot of these songs feature the full speed, aggressive, just play 16th notes and make a lot of noise and scream on top of it for the meat of their song. But when we get to the final 10 or 15 seconds of a track, they tend to find, I don't know if melodic is the right word for it, but they find more nuanced ways of expressing themselves to wrap songs up. And that's not to say that's across the board. There's plenty of songs that end by just playing their raw, loud, aggressive stuff right up to the final beat and then just stopping abruptly. There's a few tracks that do that. But I have found that the ending is something I look forward to on most of these tracks. Not because, hey, the track's over, we're one step closer to wrapping up the album, but because that seems to be the point when I enjoy the song the most. The lyrics have said what they want to say, and I can engage with the music. Usually because the vocals are also gone, I can hear the guitars a bit clearer, but also because this tends to be the point where they say, oh, this is a guitar and drum focused section, let's do something with this. And I find that to be an interesting way of writing, even if they're just little 10-second segments at the end of songs. To go for something a bit less noisy, I suppose would be the way of putting it. It's still heavy, compressed. There's still a lot of noise component to it, but they aim for something just slightly more dexterous, I suppose would be how I describe it. And I think that's pretty cool. As far as an album that isn't for me, it's interesting that I can still find moments within it that work for me. Again, maybe not something I'd seek out on my own, but definitely things I can look forward to in this experience, in this journey through this album. All right, lyrics on these three. I'm trying to figure out what the thread is on all of these lyrics. Because, see, the thing is, right? Normally, when I bring up concept albums, people think of an album where each song tells a specific part of a story designed to be heard all in one go so you get the full picture, like scenes of a film. But albums can be conceptual in different ways. It doesn't just have to tell a story. If every single song of an album is about self-harm, you have a concept album. If every single track on an album is about finding happiness in dark places, you have a concept album. It is an album about a concept. And the thing is that usually albums are created in a smallish frame of time. Some albums definitely take decades to come out, but most albums, I would say, have like a 1 to 2 year time frame of being created, with the writing process taking up a fraction of that. So what you actually end up getting is a very contained view of an artist or a composer or a band, who they were at that point in time. It's why when you listen to an album written in 2020, they all kind of share similar vibes. Due to the coronavirus and quarantining, we were all kind of stuck in our houses, and that created a very specific experience. And so there's a conceptual element through a lot of music of that time, not just a specific band, and that's just like on a global scale. But I mean, you ever listen to a band and early in their album they're talking about how low their life is, and at the end of their discography they have brighter things to say. Maybe they got clean from drugs, maybe they just found happiness, maybe they were able to support themselves, and maybe they were homeless when they started writing music. And you can see who they were along this journey. Even if it's not a concept intentionally, it still can be conceptual. I don't know what the snapshot of this band is at this time, though. I kind of thought we were in for one thing at the beginning of the album. It was definitely about oppression. Whether that was oppression from systems, whether it was oppression of governments. We even had oppression of spouses with the domestic violence song. It was all about people being weak under the boot of someone else. These three songs kind of are, it's pushing in a different direction, and it feels less about being held down and more just nihilism, a bleak outlook on life in general. It takes some of those themes I saw at the beginning and twists them and contorts them. What started out as an album that's felt like a rally call to fight back kind of just feels like an album that just wants to acknowledge the negativity in life. With this track, Rose. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. The song's lyrics aren't in English. I believe this is a Swedish band, so maybe they're in Swedish? I don't know. Anyways, I have an English translation for it. And it just says that when your home has been set on fire, the only thing you can do is flee. Take flight from it. But eventually they'll keep you locked up in a cage of democracy's collapsing clay. That's it. That's the whole song. They do have an element of oppression in there. They view that this democracy to be holding them down and caging them in, but that's the whole song. Very different from some of the earlier tracks that were about fighting back, about turning the tables. The Smallest Man is just an angry song. There is a continued use of calling, well, the end of it says, "You see, to me, you're the smallest man to walk this earth, a failure from birth." A lot of this song is just putting this person down, saying some of the worst things they can. I don't know who this person is. I don't know what this person did to our protagonist. It's getting away from a lot of the themes of the album and turning this person into an oppressor. Maybe this smallest man had all of this coming to him. Maybe this is where the tables have turned, but without tying it back to any of the other songs of oppression, we just have a bully here. Just talking smack to some unnamed person. In fact, the entire chorus can pretty much be summed up in encouraging this other person to commit suicide. It's not a great track. I did not enjoy the lyrics on this one at all. Which kind of sucks because I think this was one that I had a couple of positive things to say about the musical direction of it. The only notion of what this person might have done is said at the end when he says, "Your loyalty is a joke, just pure cash flow." This seems to be maybe a capitalist who is trying to take any advantage they can to make themselves wealthier, but it's one line out of 20. The rest of the song is just belittling this person. From an artistic perspective, maybe this was a way to get some aggression out about a very specific person in the lyricist's life. But death of the author, what I'm getting out of this song, it's not great. I'm curious how other people might interpret this one. I'm not going to read most of the lyrics. I'm not going to read any of the lyrics, actually, other than that little bit at the end. You're welcome to go look it up yourself. It's not great. But then we end up with Cornered. And this one just talks about putting someone in checkmate. Putting them in a corner, scared. But it doesn't seem to do anything with that concept. It says, "Deadlock, stalemate, cornered like an animal, paralyzed but shivering, alone with yourself to fear. Open vein, blood's drained, just an empty shell of shame. Deadlock, stalemate, break your own chains." And that's it. Is this a continuance from The Smallest Man? Is this saying now that you're nothing, you've got to do this on your own? I can see how small you are. Or is this completely unrelated? Is this is this him talking to himself? Hey, I'm in this state. I'm alone and afraid, as many of these songs have been, that I'm being oppressed. He says, "I need to break the chains myself." Cornered like an animal, the rest of that typically is that an animal cornered is one of the most dangerous. That tends to be the rest of that idiom, but it's not recognized here. Is it implied? Am I supposed to understand that? If so, this is saying that this person's at their lowest and they're still going to fight back, but what's literally stated on the paper is just, once again, belittling somebody at their lowest. And I don't know how to read it. For an album that, up until this point, I've praised for being pretty direct with what it wants to say, it's reached a point of vagueness that it has me re-evaluating the rest of the lyrics on the album. I haven't necessarily praised the lyrics on this album, but I haven't really condemned them either. It's sort of been in a neutral place, but these 3 songs, they're kind of making me wonder what my relationship is to the lyrical content here. Because it seems non-coincidental for 3 tracks back to back to be pushing this type of content, this lyrical direction. Well, let's keep moving forward. I'll probably do the next 3 again. Groupings of 3 seem to work for me anyways, allowing myself to remember that much music. And that should give us the no, we'll have to shrink those down at the end. We have a couple of back-to-back 2-minute songs. All right, let's see where Nasum takes us from here, though. That's a different sound. Aggressive still, but...
Don't you change your fucking thing! Because the world is broken! Don't you choose to come within! All your prophets soon to be dead! To be dead! Like the bloody always has to stay! Pick up with the present society! This is the only answer! Like the bloody always has to stay! With the bloody face of me! This is the only answer! No one for society is now! With the last of you being to escape! Nothing is right on your ready! Go round, my legs and on the right! On the right! As the body always has to say! Take up with the present society! This is the only answer! As the body always has to say! With the body face of me! This is the only answer!
That's the most aggressive I think this album's been. Like a bumblebee in my ear. So silence isn't something I've brought up too much yet today. I think we're going to have to talk about that. See, the end of a song, get a little groovier, a little bit of change. A little slower than the intro, isn't it? All right. 3 songs back to back that, I mean, for the most part, locked into that fast, grindy style. A lot of the, not nuance, but the changes, the slight dynamics that I've talked about on this album have kind of been pushed away. We didn't really hear any of it in that block. Except for that interesting atmospheric sound there, just 20 seconds ago or so. Again, much like, what track was that? That was early on, I think. Was it Engine of Death? Maybe it was Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, where we just had that atmospheric sound on the outside of the track for a couple of seconds. They did the same thing here. I'd love to hear more of that. I think it gives the song an interesting contrast just on size, also on timbre a little bit. Just kind of gets away from that singularity of sounds. And I do think I'm being beaten down by it. I do. I think to say that I'm becoming fatigued by this is an understatement. They do one thing really well all the time, constantly, with basically zero breaks from it. Again, that 70-30 thing, although I feel like I need to adjust that percentage now as we're getting closer to the end of the album and we're getting less of those groovier ideas, less of the halftime feels. Maybe it's just because I'm thinking more about it, but it just feels like we're in that constant speed mode more often. It's draining. This is not my cup of tea. And the thing is, too, is I know that I'm elongating this experience. Maybe if I listen to this all in one shot, just straight 35 minutes, maybe it would be more intense, but it would also be over eventually. This is like pausing in the middle of a suspense moment in a film when, you know, the bad guy is like creeping up on the main character and the music's tense and there's like these very quiet violins with these dissonant dyads being played and the camera's low to the ground and all you can see are the feet and the distance closing, and then you pause it and like you're still kind of in this tense mode, but you're like you had to take a phone call or something, or you had to go to the bathroom or get some snacks or something, and so you're elongating this feeling and it makes it feel worse, right? It kind of lessens it a little bit since you're not in that moment, but it makes it feel so much longer. In fact, I think this works really well with the concept of like binging a show and really not feeling the weight of the cliffhangers too much versus watching it live week by week. And it feels like the tension lasts longer. It sticks with you longer too, because you remember this taking up so much time rather than being gone in the blur of a weekend. Um, and I feel like me stretching this 30-minute album out to, well, 2 hours now. I figure this is going to be about a 2 hour, 45-minute video, probably. Um, all of my feelings of, I guess, dislike. I don't like this album. I think that's fair to say. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just not for me. I'm not the audience for this at all. It's stretching out that feeling and making this feel like it takes a long time, and that's not something inherent to the album, but it is inherent to my different experience with it. This is not a normal experience of the album. Um, but it could just be that the warping of time here is making the more intense sections feel like they're showing up more often. Regardless, though, I'm becoming fatigued at this point. I'm not enjoying myself with this album. The best part about it is the length. I think it's a blessing and a curse. There are things I've learned about myself and my own writing, and the experience with the shorter songs is helpful, but it's also not music I'm enjoying. And so knowing that any sound, if it's really something I don't like, it's only, 60 seconds away, and that's going to be over. We can try something new. Granted, that something new tends to be very similar to what we just checked out, but I mean, even here, knowing that there's, what, 7 songs left, it feels like such a short amount of time knowing each of those tracks is only about a minute and a half each. Again, blessing and a curse. I'm sure if you really enjoy this album goes by in a blur and you want more of it. But yeah, to wrap that up, I'm ready for this album to be over. Unless they have a trick here at the end, some change of pace, a little altered scenery going on. I'd love that. They kind of allude to it at times, but I don't think it's what they're going to give me. Especially with the album turning as bleak as it is, it almost seems to be an illusion of hope just out of my grasp, slipping through my fingertips, giving me a little bit of uplift only to pull me down further into despair. And thematically, that works fantastic. Um, it does make me lose hope that I'll find something I really like in this album, though. I do want to talk about the vocals, though. I feel like we're getting a bit more of the dual vocals here. I believe it was the track The Clash that had a layering at the end of each line, basically 2 vocal sets. I think it was a center and an outside, a higher harsh and then a lower harsh. And it wasn't just passing back and forth, but when this line was 75% done, this one kicked in. And so they were kind of overlapping at the end of each of their sentences, and it creates this really cool back and forth going on. That adds on to this feeling of crushing weight. There's no gap between these 2 vocal lines. They overlap. So, in fact, instead of having a space between them that we can peer through, it's actually more weight at times than when we only have the one vocal delivery. And again, artistically, that works really well. It makes these songs feel even denser, even though we're not changing much. It's still just one vocal line being delivered after another. You overlap one beat, though, and, well, now it feels like there's less gaps in the fence. I like that. But it's also introducing more variety to the low vocals. I don't really feel like we got a lot of those on the first half of this album, but we're seeing more of them used in juxtaposition to the higher ones, and it's creating some sonic contrast that I'm appreciating. Having been teased with that a little bit at the beginning of the album, only to listen to like 15 or 20 minutes straight of just that higher vocal style, it's cool to bring the lower one back and to have those back and forth still. In fact, I think it was at the end of Hets, the track we just listened to, that we got them layered. We got the harmony of the higher and the lower on top of each other. I think that was the first time we got that at all. It's I mean, I don't really like either one of the harsh styles, but I've always said in the past, I think it's cool to have harmonized harshes. Even if it's harsh styles I don't like, the end result is typically pretty cool. And I'll agree with that here. It was a very cool sound to hear. I'm always going to be a fan of that, even if I don't necessarily like the way it sounds. I mentioned silence, something that we were going to have to talk about here. At the beginning of the album, I mentioned that there was no room for silence at all. Even the tracks transitioned directly into themselves. Not that they had anything to carry over and move between, but simply that the song ends on one beat and the next one starts on the next. There's no 2-second space between tracks on this album. And it creates a very oppressive experience throughout it. But here we're beginning to see more and more use of silence. In fact, I think it was either The Clash or Hets that had 2 or 3 very abrupt stops where everyone stops playing for a single beat before coming in on the next, usually with a bigger, larger section. This is a cornerstone to a lot of metal. It allows you to continue to play at 10 all the time, which metal loves to do, but give the ears a quick, brief moment to reset to hear what 0 feels like, and then punch back into the 10. It isn't a full reset. It isn't really going to allow that 10 to feel like a 10 again. Not like if you had shifted to a much smaller section, a 3 or a 5, for an elongated amount of time and allowed the listener to really revel and understand what a quieter, less intense section sounds like, so you can punch back in above that. But it does have a soft reset element. And they use it. It's so quick that I don't think it's a reset at all. In fact, the silence ends up feeling like the punch more so than the coming back in. And I think that's an interesting little phenomenon. But it also provides these little moments, not of relaxation or anything, but just an unexpected moment. Silence against pure noise like this tends to be relief, but that's not what's here. In fact, once again, I think it almost feels like an illusion of hope. You hear that beat of silence and you're like, oh, a second away from this noise, but it's not, because of the tempo that they play at and how quickly that makes them come back in with the next section. It's an illusion. It's almost no silence at all. And in fact, I think if you looked at the wavelength, it would not be total silence. Granted, there is no instrument playing there, but the sound of the guitars still linger, and it's only for a fraction of a second that nothing's being played anyways. I don't think we ever hit a true 0 volume. In fact, I should watch the spectral stuff over there, and if they do that again, and kind of see how far the volume actually drops on that stuff. It might be more illusory than I even imagine. And again, I don't like it, but it fits so well with the themes that they're doing here that I can't be mad at it. I just don't want to hear it. Let's look at the lyrics on these 3 and see what's going on. All right. Strife is about a lack of hope for society. It says that those on the top are bringing society to its knees, completely sucking it dry of humanity. It has corrupt morale and blind hatred, and that's all that's left there. The outro is just a statement. There's no hope for society. The Clash is leaning into this about society breaking down. It talks about a cloud of hate drawing near tonight that won't pass, and that there will be a clash in this city. Verse 2 says, a battle cry breaks out as the tragic fight begins. The city streets are now a zone for war. The chorus just says, the ghost of civilization will ascend and the dust of devastation will descend. It says the streets were covered with red. Hets is another one that isn't in English. It roughly translates to pressure, and talks about how people are so far beaten down that even though they might want to fight, they lack the will to fight. The chorus says, what, are you just going to lie down and die? I'm burnt out, spent, and totally exhausted. This is the thanks that we get for all that we've done. There's just wear and tear on our bodies. So, in with the old, or out with the old, in with the next slave. It says that there's strife for something unreachable, but our skin has continued to be whipped and sore, and the pressure drowns us out. The outro simply repeats what happened to your life. It got burnt out, it got exhausted, and pressure took over. Basically, a way of continuing on with the idea of the machine of death, but taking it to the next level, that instead of chewing up human bodies, it looks at human bodies as a part of the machine that gets chewed up, not the fuel of it, but the mechanical parts itself. And that when the wear and tear kicks in and the body parts, the machine parts wear down, you just replace them, chuck them out, put a new one in, and it views humans in this manner. So that was an interesting group of three prior to this group of three, which I feel I start get behind again. I don't know. It's like Nasum just veered off for a little bit, and I was like, hey, what are y'all doing over there? Oh yeah, we gotta get back on track here. These songs seem to line up again with the oppressive side of things, and it just makes me think that maybe the other three tracks were just a bottling up of aggression and finally releasing it a little bit. I don't know if I should look on them too harshly, given that this album is generally about feeling beaten down by powers that you can't defeat on your own, and finally having a small victory, and maybe going a little overboard with it, but I can kind of see a feeling of finally releasing some of that aggression on someone deserving. Maybe that was the whole point of that section. I don't know. It fits within the themes. It's just it escalates things rather quickly, and that happens. So, moving on. I don't know how many we're gonna do in a group here. Let's just see where this takes us. I thought this album was already noisy. I did not know it had more to give. This might be one of the faster tracks as well, right? This is spoken. Yeah, see, these are the moments that I look forward to. This is solid writing. Backed off a little bit to wrap this song up. That's what I'm talking about. I look forward to these endings. Just two notes. Oh, a bit of almost like funky melody from the guitars. Wait, is this a fade out? No. Okay. That fun little cymbal work, man. I'd love to hear more of that. This drummer has some cool ideas, and they just don't get a lot of chances to showcase it. An interesting choice to bring the guitars down a bit in pitch. The vocals also aren't as prominent right now. They're not covering up the guitars. Oh, the fun little metric mod. Who is this band? This is not the same Nasum that we've been listening to this whole album. They didn't go for the faster, aggressive stuff. A little bit of a harmonic shift, but not a tempo one. Yeah! Okay, yeah. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Where has that been this whole album? I mean, like, I get it, right? It's not very grindy at all. It's not not the kind of music they like to write. But between that and Wrath, it shows a very different side to them that I could probably get behind. More diversity in the sound. It's higher contrast, rhythmically, melodically, harmonically. That we actually changed between a couple of different chords maybe even modes here. I think we went into something. It wasn't Phrygian, but it was something adjacent to it. I would really love to know what that atmospheric part in the middle of this song was. We didn't sit in it for very long before coming back to something a bit more like metallic pentatonic stuff. But I mean, yeah, just like all over the place. The rhythmic changes, the tempo changes, the accelerandos and retardandos going on in here. Just like, yeah, dude, this is what I'm talking about. I can get behind this. There's groove, there's movement, there's change. Yeah, yeah, dude. Wrath was a good track, but I think that just took over as my favorite on the album. And there's just so many neat little ideas in there. I mean, the entire metric modulation concept, moving to these slower triplets that we have in the chorus, where you have that bump, 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 and then you bring it back up, you bring that tempo back up, focusing on the quarter notes again rather than the triplet quarter notes. And it's just like, it has this complete feel of breaking down and then resetting. And I have no idea if that's what's going on lyrically. I kind of hope it is. They've done a pretty good job. I mean, most of it's just it's aggressive music. They have aggressive lyrics. These things work together. Like, yeah. But I think there's also a really a keen understanding of what they want to sing about and what kind of music they like to make, and making sure that these pairings happen often. And so when we do have musical changes like this, there's a part of me that thinks that it's intentional, and that when we get to the lyrics, we're going to feel some of this there too. I mean, we might not, I guess. But, I mean, just. I was going to say, like, the last 2 minutes of this, I'm so used to songs that y'all throw at me being like 4 to 5 minutes long. And when I think of, like, yeah, it was like the last, quarter of the track, we're talking like a minute or two. No, we're talking like 30 seconds of this song. Oh man, pop tracks are longer than. Well, actually, this was 2.5. This is longer than some pop tracks today. Most of the stuff on this album's been real short. But yeah, dude, the final like 40 seconds of this track were just solid. Shifting from the faster playing to the halftime groove stuff to the breaking down, just really focusing on the singular reduction of tempo, the groove of it all. Even the production on the vocals with the fight terror with terror, just kind of bouncing back and forth. I thought that was really well done. Gives the song a little bit of a change and bounciness there too. Oh, dude, talking about the vocals here. The mix is different on this track, right? Am I the only one that heard that? The vocals are pushed in a little more. They're not quite as present. They're not stuffed into the mix. It's not that you can't hear them, but the guitars flourish around the vocals. When both are active, I can make out both of what they're doing. The vocals just feel a little quieter than usual. But I think something else that helped, and maybe this is just creating the illusion of the vocals being quieter, is that the guitars are lower, are focusing on lower pitches than they have across this album. I think, anyways. And it's operating in a space that the vocals typically aren't, and it gives them a place to be heard. I don't know 100% of what's going on here, because the guitars do bump up a little bit back into their traditional range that we've heard on this album. Maybe it is a little production, maybe it is a little composition. Regardless, everything feels balanced here in a way that the rest of the album doesn't. And I guess there's another possibility here, is that I'm just adapting to their production style. We'll see what happens in this final 6 minutes of the album, if they go back, or if my hearing makes it feel like they've gone back to another style, a different mixed, or if I continue to hear this nice division between everything. The tempo, though, certainly helps a lot here. too, just being able to hear everything without all of the attacks going on. But I do think that there is a mixed difference. The vocals just don't seem as loud as usual. Still clear, still loud enough. They feel like they have a little more clarity to them. Does anybody else pick that up? Something I haven't really touched on this album that I've noticed, but I didn't really think it was worth bringing up, was extra compression on the vocals. This vocalist certainly is doing natural compression, creating these very gnarly sounds, but I feel like there's extra compression put on and maybe even a little bit of overdrive on the vocals. There's been a couple of times where the vocals have reached the point where I can hear clipping going on in the recording, where the volume is just a little too loud on the vocals, and it's going to create that extra bit of static, that extra bit of white noise on top of the vocals that gives it that extra gnarly sound. And I do think the vocals have a nice width and depth to them that maybe is possible to create naturally. I'm not going to say I'm a an extremely knowledgeable person on harsh vocals and what is or isn't naturally possible. But there is a width that I typically associate with additional processing put on top of the recording. And the clipping, I think, showcases a little bit of that too. I don't really hear too much of that here. It feels a bit more restrained in a way that feels more natural, but also works well within the mix. That extra grit that comes from the production side, the extra clipping, is part of what makes the vocals meld into what the guitars are doing, because the guitars are operating with a ton of overdrive and compression too. I mean, the overdrive is what gives you that gritty metallic sound. It's introducing clipping in a controlled way to the guitar sound. And so I think there's just a lot of crosstalk going on there as far as frequencies and resonance on the digital side of audio. That is what's caused a lot of my issues with clarity on this album, and I'm not getting that here. And I kind of wish the whole album was done like this. It feels less, maybe less raw would be the word, but to me it feels better balanced. I can make everything out, and it doesn't really lose any of its intensity or animosity. It's still a very extreme sound. It's just measured in a way that makes things easier to hear. Track 19, Fury, a lot of more of the same. There was that one part in the middle that kind of surprised me, and the outro was okay. Like I said, I like the outros. I look forward to them. 18, though, closer to the end. What was that? I mean, the entire opening of this track was just noisier than I think I've ever heard. And I'm pretty sure once the song entered in proper, when all the instruments came in, the vocals started singing. This was the fastest I think we've heard the band play on this album. That's an intense song. I mean, I think that pushed the limits. I felt like this album's been running at a 10 this entire time. That pushed us up to like a 10 and a half. I don't know. I don't think I have anything to add to it. There's nothing I think that was technically going on there that was impressive or would have led to any of this. It was faster and noisier and more focused on dissonant tones than anything else. And it creates something that surprised me in an album that, I pretty much got it nailed down. There's 4 songs to go. I think I kind of get what's going on in this album. And they still found a way to surprise me, to trip me up a little bit. It wasn't really that big of a difference, but it's just like, wow, I thought you were at the limit and you proved me wrong. I can appreciate that in a band, especially one that's, like I've said, is really focused on a single sound here. Not a lot of deviation from it. And they can still say, yeah, we can take this further if we want to. And it's just like, well, okay. I'm not judging, man. I just thought you were at your limits already. Good gravy. Let's look up some lyrics to these 3, and then I think we're just going to run the last 4 into each other. 5, 6 minutes? Dude, we've done like 15-minute songs on this channel before. What's 6 minutes of me? I just really hope that the tracks are all fairly similar like the album has been. I suppose if any of them are quite a deviation, we'll just take a break there and talk about it. All right, lyrics. Now, aside from being a point of no return, I'm not too sure what the specifics are of Closer to the End. It says he'll point out a place where it will happen, a spot that people will visit and fear. He'll take you there on a rainy day and give you the final decision. I've never made it further than this, never tried or had the chance, but it feels like being cut in 1,000 pieces, and he's finally closer to his destiny. His last hour is finally here. He'll see you on the other side. I assume the he in this is the general antagonist of this entire album. Again, I don't think it's conceptual, but it's pretty clear what this album has been rallying against. He is just a general oppressor, maybe not necessarily the endgame oppressor. However, we do see a little bit of that in these 3 tracks here. Regardless, I don't know who is directly being pointed out here, but it is a point of no return, and it seems that nobody has made it past this point. We have to see what happens on the other side. Fury is about looking at the way things are today and seeing that they're actually not that different than before. The chorus says that there's no equality in present day. There's been no progress made. We're still here just to produce and consume. We're all still their slaves. Of all of these years, these decades, these centuries, all of this history before us, why do we keep walking the same path? Verse 2 says, all signs point towards regression. None show the width of their obsession, this undeniable truth. Without conscience, without faith. Calls it a mental ice age. That we've become machine-like beings, all of our thoughts smothered. It shows a lack of hope. That we continue to allow ourselves to be put in these positions of oppression. I kind of figured then that Fight Terror with Terror would be about rallying people once again, but I don't think it is. The chorus says, I see you walk through fake fires for those you say you love, but their hopes are built upon a pile of lies, craving justice to be done. Once again, this is looking at a false leader. Basically says that you make it look like you're going to help people. In fact, you even look like you're walking through fire to help out people, but it's fake fire. You're never in danger, and all of these are lies. Verse 2 says, all praise our mighty leader, self-proclaimed servant of truth, the bearer of this holy sword, decapitating the youth. And I think this is interesting too. A majority of this album has sort of focused on earthly, natural ideas, a lot of ways of relating the human experience to mud and dirt and wells and holes and all this idea of this iconography of hopelessness and worthlessness in the natural kingdom, right? But the last track brought up machine-like beings. This one brings up just like a robot, only colder, your circuits have been burned. The second track in a row to bring technology into the conversation as an analogy for the ways that people act, whether it's cold like a robot or programmed like a robot. It's removing a very natural element of the human experience at this point. I'm curious what it is that happened here, if this is a purposeful change in language, or if maybe this was something that happened in the creation process. You know, maybe the lyrics felt this way earlier on, and around this time, this person started to really get into the idea of social media and how technology was changing how we engage with people. And they're like, oh, you know, I want to start talking about technology in my music. Or maybe it wasn't even conscious. It just started, you know, reading more about it, and it just seeped its way into the way that they talk about people and cunning leaders. Regardless, I do think it's interesting to see these two back to back introduce this concept. But basically, it says, you know, you're this slick leader that you call yourself a servant of truth, but obviously you're not. You're lying to all these people. The rest of the song is just fight terror with terror, over and over and over again. I'd call it a rallying song, but I don't know. There's at one point he says, "We'll bring the terror." It feels like you've been terrorizing us this entire time. How about we flip the tables? But flipping the tables has been something we've explored a lot on this album, usually with a direct relationship to an action. In this song, it just kind of comes out of nowhere. You'd think with all of the lyrics about lying and deception that this rallying cry would have had to do with that, as we've seen repeatedly in this album. But no, it just kind of comes out of nowhere with this. Maybe I'm just being overly critical about the lyrics on this one song. All right, let's wrap this up. As you can see, this track is just 58 seconds long. Then we have a 2-minute, a 1-minute, and a 2-minute. And unless something happens, some wild change in music, we're just going to run them all together and see how they wrap this album up. Okay, that was a cool use of silence to sort of reset the temporal feel. 18 seconds to go. Cool riff. I'm telling you, the outros on this are where it's at.
Globalization is expanding rapidly. Many are left wondering if the media are offering a clear analysis of the critical voices.
Often very flawed, in part because it narrows the range of discourse. But what about other people in the world who have points of view? Do we ever hear from them? Do we ever hear from critics of the policy in the same way that we hear from people who support the status quo or who are selling the policy?
This fun little bouncy, and then it's a wild duality of riffs and time feels. I feel like I invite this. No matter who the band is, whenever I say, I feel like I got a good idea of what's going on, we're just going to run a few together, they always change things up on me. If I say nothing, it'll be the same thing all album. Dude, that was wild. I just want to talk about that real quick. We did have some cool atmospheric bits in there, but not too different from some of the other stuff that we've talked about. I don't really have much to add to it other than that we had some cool sounds coming in around the band and exploring an atmospheric take, this texture around the riffage. And that was mostly during the sample at the beginning of the track. Oh, what I want to focus on though, that verse, I think it is, super speed, constant playing, driving 16th stuff, alternating snare and bass kick, just really oppressive, constant sound, and then that bouncier, punkier idea. That's the second time that I've heard a punky concept. It was a few tracks ago. There was a punk melody or a punky melody that was showing up in the guitar riff at one point, and that was interesting. I don't remember what track that was, and I didn't really have much to add to it. I remember I pointed it out, and that was all I said. But now we have like this bouncy drum idea going on in here. And what's interesting too is this whole song has been really focused on symmetric, straightforward rhythms. A lot of it is 4/4, either looking at one or two bar phrases, really simple stuff. But here, when we get to that punkier drum beat, it's groupings of 3/3/2, da 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 da. And then we get back into that really fast, aggressive stuff. And I'm just gonna come out and say it, dude. It's jarring. I enjoy it. Unlike what would we call it? Like it's very random, right? It's very absurd. It's kind of obtuse. I love absurdist humor, and so when I hear absurd music, sometimes it's going to make me chuckle. And I think this is one of those cases where it's just so bonkers, so out of left field. Like, we've listened to 30 minutes of music and they really haven't done anything like this. And then out of nowhere, here at the end of an album, they're like, let's throw this in here. Let's play around with some groupings of rhythms. let's let's make this feel a little bouncier. Like you want to start skanking rather than doing the what is it, windmill with your hair. It's just kind of bizarre. There's nothing that leads up to it. There's no preamble for this. There's no way to be set up for this. It just happens and you have to deal with it, and then they keep letting it happen. This bouncing back and forth between their very driving aggressive stuff and then this lighter, bouncier 3/3/2 asymmetric stuff. It it's wild. How does this even happen? Um and it's just, I thought it would just be a one-off, like a lot of their ideas. In fact, most of the times when I found something that wasn't their pure aggression, I enjoyed it. And it was a one-off idea. Play it for 5 seconds and move on. We don't even remember we were doing it. What do you mean we did something atmospheric and fun for a second? Nah, we're just aggressive and brutal. It's almost like they just completely dismissed that they went in that direction at all. But here, they keep coming back to it. It's so outside of the norm for what I've come to understand as their writing style, both in singular idea, what the concept is in and of itself, but also in structure. You just can't make this stuff up, man. It's bonkers, dude. It really is. It puts a smile on my face. I'm glad here at the end of the album, there's literally just 3 minutes and 22 seconds to go. They found a way to put a smile on my face to kind of crack me up a little bit. And I don't know if they did it intentionally. I wouldn't call it a funny thing. It is, I think fun would be a good word. I'm not thinking the lyrics are fun or funny in any way, though. It's definitely not lighthearted, but it is sort of absurd. And sometimes absurdity can be comical. And I think that's what happened here. And I needed to take a moment to explain what's going on there because it's absurd. It's wild. Who would do that? Nasum would, apparently. Why they're doing it? I have no idea. I really couldn't tell you. It works though, right? I think that at the end of the day, is as disjointed as it ends up being, it kind of works. And it's the brave who take the chances, I suppose. And that's not a direction I think I would have gone if this was my style of writing, but they did, and I don't think it hindered the song at all. And they had the guts to stick with it, so you know, props to them, I suppose. Lyrics. All right, track 21. Once again, focusing on a specific individual whom I'm still not aware of. It's probably just due to me not being aware of Swedish politics circa early 2000s. It's a bit outside of my depth, but it says the way you have chosen is crooked. One step forward, two steps back, and everyone just laughs and you stand there ashamed. It can't be easy being the idiot of the world. An inflamed wound, your politics stink. We long for the day you rot in your grave. So yeah, just somebody that this person does not agree with on any way, and it's possibly even on a much larger scale. No one agrees with them. They're just a buffoon on the global stage, but they do have control. They are in charge of stuff. And so it says that we, whoever we is, we wait for you to die. We can't wait until that day. Deleted scenes is, I like it on a conceptual level. It's a very cool idea. The idea here is that you can't trust the media put in front of you. You can't trust the news because it's biased, especially the news that is given to you. It says, do you trust the news? Do you buy their made up views? What's the use of a media you cannot choose? So basically, this is just handed to you and told it's the truth. You must accept this. You didn't get to choose it. You didn't have a selection of different sources. You're just told this is it. It says, hail to the TV screen. So many truths to choose between. All the blood and all the screams. Now, this is interesting because to me, this makes a lot of sense. As far as I'm concerned, most major news outlets in America focused on fear-based news. We very rarely heard anything of uplift. It was all about telling you all the dangerous things happening, all the crime in your neighborhood, all the bad things that are happening. But I always took that as the butt of the joke. The rest of the world had okay media. America had the one that only told you all the bad stuff. Maybe that wasn't true though. I'm curious if this song was about US news media or if maybe Sweden also had this issue. But what I like about this is the idea of taking this concept of these are news articles, but this is what's going to be presented to the masses, and viewing it as a film. The chorus says, "What you see is just their final shot. Real life censored shot by shot. So realize that truth is hacked up by knives." This whole concept of viewing it as creating a film, of taking all of these shots and cutting it into a specific order to showcase a specific story. It's about controlling a narrative, but using the metaphor of film creation. It's the post-processing part of it. I think it's a very clever metaphor. I like that. All right, I guess that it's going to push us into the final two tracks here then. Creature and Darkness Falls. 3.5 minutes. Let's see how Nasum wraps this up. I have to be cautious because sometimes they lead up to something like this and then go into that full oppression sound. Sometimes trick me. I should do that sometimes, a little bit of a bait and switch. Okay, so that's still 4/4. It's just chopped up really disjointedly. Okay, they're keeping that core motif but turned it into constant 16ths. That's nice. Oh, that's fun. I do want to go back to the first track really quickly. The rest of the end of the album kind of felt a little clearer to me. So I am going to play Partcles real quick. I'm going to skip past the atmospheric intro. I want to hear the mix of the vocals against the guitars. All right, let's try that again. Or not. I guess I don't get to check that out. Bandcamp only allows one free play, it looks like, which is fine. I guess I'll have to find that out later then. Alright, so anyways, like I was mentioning, I do think that the mix sounds better even on that last track, and part of that is a very different style of music, which we're going to get into, but I wonder if a lot of it is just me acclimating to the mix. Maybe it wasn't so much that, was that track 21 or something? Track 20 had a different mix to it. It's just that finally, after like 25 minutes, I finally adapted to the way that they place everything, and I began to hear the guitar tones better. I still think that they're in the same range as the vocals, and the vocals are more present in the mix. There's definitely parts where I felt that they were still muddy, but on the whole, I felt like I could hear the guitars with more clarity in these last few tracks. So, I don't know, I'd like to investigate that more, but apparently I can't do that today. But I am curious how anybody else felt about this. Is this an album that you've heard a million times? Do you hear the guitars very clearly? Or don't you? I mean, I still there's a lot of overlappage there, but maybe after more familiarity you can make things out better. Or was this your first time listening like me, and even at the end it still felt cluttered? I'm curious what other people's experience is with this, because right now I'm not sure where to stand on that. Now, as for track 23, not much difference there. Track 24, though, very interesting outro. A higher focus on melody. We had some new harmony coming in there. The rhythms kind of changed up a little bit, reducing the intensity, allowing us to hear not necessarily more syncopation, but just less notes at one time. I'm curious about the lyrics, given that it's called Darkness Falls. I assume this would be the most intense part of the album, and yet it lets up at the end. The aggression is removed for harmony, melody, different rhythms, and eventually even a fade out, which is something they did not entertain at all on this album. As I mentioned, every outro, every ending to a song is just a very abrupt stop, or maybe two or three staccato notes to create a sense of finality to the end of a riff. We don't really have an idea of winding a song down at all. Yeah, the album is really about keeping that intensity maxed out for the entirety of the runtime until here at the end, and we get a fade out. Yeah, I think it works well. I think even just by contrast, it presents something unique here that calls attention to itself. It's a smart decision. I don't know what it represents yet, but just on the sheer concept of contrast, and highlighting specific things, this is unique, and it draws attention to itself and makes me want to explore why did they do this. And I can get behind that. I can. There's artistry behind that concept right there, and I gotta know what it is. But otherwise, I mean, the album ends, aside from that final minute, pretty much like the rest of the album. It's a band that knows what they do. They stay in their lane a majority of the time, deviate ever so slightly from it. There isn't any point in here where I think we really veer off into new territory. Everything in here is very metal, very aggressive, very overwhelming, very compressing. There's a couple of moments where we introduce some levity, but we don't ever really get into like an acoustic bit or a purely like post-rock atmosphere or something like that. Everything is there to be crushing and driving. And a lot of that fits with what we're talking about lyrically on this album, which is oppression. Oppression from within, oppression from without, oppression from people, oppression from ideas. It's a song about being at the bottom of a rung all the time. So for an album that's about feeling small and weak and low all the time, and all these forces pushing in around you, creating a sonic atmosphere of compression at all times, of a weight that just doesn't let go, any sort of crack in it, something that you can see through and maybe be like, oh, there's a weakness, I can break through this. It's always closed up. It's more of an illusion of hope than anything else. It's not an actual weakness, it just looks like one. And that feeling of utter hopelessness, lyrically and musically, it's aligned pretty well. There are some lyrics in here that are about fighting back, but musically we never really see much of that. I'm curious if there's a purpose for that. Maybe, I don't know, they have a thematic reason to explore that, but it could just be that this is the kind of music the band makes, so you can't really bend that. The guitarists like to play what they like to play, regardless of what the lyricist wants to write about. So I guess with this musical bit out of the way, I don't really have much to add on here, as like I said, we kind of wrapped up pretty much how the album has been. I think I've said my piece on the way that they write music generally. Let's look at these final two bits of lyrics and see how they decide to wrap this song up as far as the themes go in that direction. Alright, so Creature is once again likening these oppressors, or in this case a specific oppressor, to being a creature, or in this case more like a wolf. The chorus says the first thing you see is the cunning smile. Then you see what's beyond those shining teeth. The verse says a wolf in human skin, a creature of the night, consuming all of the light. Verse 2 says a statue made of steel, a being that cannot die. I think this is interesting. The first just paints them as a conniving person. Someone with a silver tongue, sure, but ultimately has sinister ulterior motives. But the second paints them as something immortal. And I think this is interesting too, because it showcases something that I've been trying to figure out on this album. We're constantly jumping around between concepts and ideas and specific people of oppression. But I think that this kind of, it ties everything together. That yes, you might have a specific enemy to defeat today, but that doesn't get rid of evil in the world. And so we do have this singular person that is a wolf in human skin, but that beyond that, we also have the concept, a statue made of steel, something that you cannot kill. Human suffering is going to be a part of human existence as long as evil is in the world, as long as there are those who have no problem putting down anyone beneath them. You can't snuff that out entirely. And it's this duality, ideology and people. They must both be combated, and they are usually one and the same, but defeating one does not get rid of the other. And I think that's what's really being pointed at here in Creature. Now, Darkness Falls. This is the hope. I really didn't think we would see much of this more after the series of really hopeless tracks. But it talks about the flower rising up through the crack. It talks about rebirth after destruction. The very final stanza of the entire album says, when darkness falls, the earth will quake, and through the cracks we'll see the light. When darkness falls, we must awake. We can't give up. We have to fight. Earlier on, it says that I came alive in the wreckage as it broke all the shackles ever forged. The destruction didn't just destroy the city, it also destroyed my cage. It destroyed what bound me to this place. I'm free now. And through that freedom, we can take things back. We have hope. It basically says, at our bleakest, darkest hour, we can find that we might be more unleashed than ever. It talks about coming back to life, to be a light that consumes and erases the darkness in the worst part, the bleakest element, when the darkness has fallen. I like that. It's not quite a beautiful way of wrapping this up that I might have liked, but there is a positivity, a bit of warmth, maybe a little bit of wholesomeness to this that I really wasn't expecting. There's still a lot of this album that I feel contradicts this. Just the idea that evil is immortal. No matter how hard you fight, it will beat you down. There will always be a next oppressor. But I do like that despite that, the lyricist feels that we should still fight, that we still need to get up, that we still need to, at our darkest hour, be there and stand up and say, we'll try again. We won't lose this time. It's a positivity I didn't think the album was going to lean towards, and I do think it lines up a little bit with the music at the end, being a bit brighter and bouncier, less oppressive there into the fade out, almost as if the fade out is a to be continued. See what happens next time. This isn't the end, it's just a new beginning. A bleak one for sure, but we're in a better position than we were last time, in a sense. Interesting. Those are my thoughts. Nasum's Shift. What did you think of this album? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Maybe you have your own interpretation of things. Please put all of that and any extra thoughts you have on the album in the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three. That wraps it up for today, but I'll be back tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. UTC. We're going to be doing a live stream. It's over on Twitch, twitch.com/criticalcomposer. Don't go to Critical Reactions. That's not mine. We've had that problem once before. It's Critical Composer. And just we chill out for a couple of hours. We listen to some good music, have some cool conversations. Sometimes it deals with music, sometimes it doesn't. We just kind of see where, well, for me, the morning takes me. Some of y'all, it's afternoon, and some of y'all, it's evening. But yeah, we just hang, chill, chat, check out music. It's a good time. It's real relaxed and laid back. If it sounds great and you can make it, I highly suggest you do. Otherwise, Monday, 5 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. UTC, I'll be back with next week's theme. Until next time, then, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.